But let's go full on into health. Like, where have you seen God at work?
Yeah, let's go through the health journey. So part of, I think that when all that trauma was surfacing and unforgiveness, which I don't know if this is true, but I think there is a connection between unforgiveness and pain in your body and sickness. And so I don't know if that was what was happening, but when I look back at it, that's the only thing that makes sense because I got so many tests and everything. Basically, towards my last year of Circuit Riders, my health just slowly started to decline. And I was struggling with chronic headaches for a while where every single day I had a headache or pain in the back of my neck and I could not get it to go away. And I just kind of toughed it out. There wasn't much I could do. And then it slowly started getting worse. And there was days where my body was super fatigued. There was days where I asked my roommates to carry my laundry basket to the laundry room because I didn't have the strength to do it. I had a ton of brain fog. We would be sitting here talking and I would just like go blank and my brain wouldn't comprehend anything. My friends, they make fun of me for it now, but I used to always go, I didn't hear what you just said, or hey, I don't remember, because my brain was so foggy.
Yeah.
And I was just exhausted. I just wanted to sleep. And here's the maybe psycho side of me. I would go run.
How old were you when this was happening? Like,
how old was I?
Yeah.
I think I was, let's see, my last tour was 2022. So I was probably 22. So this was recent. Yeah. And this is what's crazy is there were some days I felt good enough. I would go for a run and then I would get home and I would just lay on the ground the rest of the day because my body was so depleted. And I even started coaching August of 2022 and struggling so much to keep up with the team because my health was just not in a good spot. And I also wasn't eating a ton. I think part of that was just I got into a rhythm of learning to not have the money to buy a ton of food, or just I wasn't in healthy disciplines of nourishing my body. So my health was just at an all-time low. And then along with that, my mental health was declining. And I had no answers. Plenty of doctor's visits. I don't do good with needles, but I had to get more blood work than you could possibly imagine. And the first time, exposed my pride. I didn't want anyone to go with me. And I knew I couldn't handle needles. I always pass out. It's just the way I operate.
Yeah.
And I was so prideful. I didn't want anyone to go. I went to the doctors by myself in Huntington Beach and I was like, okay. And I knew it. As soon as everything was done, I could feel it coming on. But I left that doctor's office and I collapsed in the parking lot and I passed out. And then I woke up and I called my friends and I said, you guys were right. You should have came with me.
Wow.
And one of them got dropped off and drove my car home. But it was a journey and it was a long journey. But oddly enough, in that season, I probably felt the closest to the Lord that I have ever felt in my life. And I think that there's something that goes along with that with suffering. And, James talks about suffering and count it all joy when you go through trials and tribulations. And I remember there was probably an hour a day where I would pace my 8x10 living room carpet and just pray Psalms 23 verse by verse. I'd say, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want.
Yeah. Continue. Don't get me sidetracked right now.
But I would literally pray, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. And I would say, God, I don't want anything. I just want you. You're the shepherd. You're the leader. I trust you. You never lead me astray. You're the one in charge. You're so intentional. And then the verse goes on and I would just pray and expound on every single moment of that scripture. And I don't know what it did in that season, But struggling through all the suffering of my health, I felt so connected to the Lord. And it was just like, there was this overwhelming, I don't know, we shouldn't rely on our feelings, but this overwhelming feeling that God was there in the midst of it. God was with me. And not every moment looked beautiful. You know, there was days, if I'm being honest, I read about this in the book, I literally felt glued to my couch cushions with depression. And I had no motivation. I couldn't get up. I felt sad. I felt empty. But God was still there.
Wow.
And I would still I would get up and pace and pray. And I watched God just move in so many beautiful, intentional, wild ways. And I learned to just trust him with my health. I'm a lot healthier now, thank God. But yeah, I think he's the shepherd.
That's so good. Wow. There's a lot right there. Eh? And when I almost want to go maybe at some point read your letter to Satan. But before doing that, there's something, one is just so beautiful that as we think of David writing the Psalm 23, the stuff he went through, right? His life was probably, it was different than ours, but at the same time, he was still a human, right? Mili, your hair is crazy.
Hey, how that happened?
I don't know, but it looks awesome.
It is you.
No, I don't know what you did, but yeah, it looks funny. There it goes, Mili. So yeah, David, and we've been watching a show called House of David that it's about the life of David. But it's just so epic and beautiful that these stories that we see in the Bible from so long ago are so relatable in a sense. These people went through stuff, right? And the fact that he was able to write something so long ago that still inspires us today, that still moves us towards God, that to me, it says a lot, because I always see David as the guy that kind of instituted worship with music and instruments for the Lord, almost as we know it, bring your instruments to the Lord and worship him with cymbals and clapping and, the pandero and stuff like that. So it's wow. And we still do that at churches today.
Yeah.
Right. But that heart of Lord, I'm open before you. I lay it all out before you. And ultimately you're my shepherd. And that, 4,000 years later, that resonates with you in your journey of mental health and depression and where are you, Lord?
Yeah.
And to be able to go to that. So I guess maybe one of the questions I have for you is, how do you approach the Bible in that sense? How do you go to the Word to find, consolation or strength? And I don't know, how does it work for you specifically? Does God prompt you maybe a verse and then you go to it? Or did you intentionally, today I'm just going to be in Psalm 23, even a practical way to go about it?
Yeah. I think in that season specifically, I definitely felt a prompting to read Psalm 23, because especially I just didn't understand what was going on with health and mentally and emotionally. So I was super intentional, just okay, I feel this prompting because this verse specifically talks about God leading. And I need his leadership in this season. I need his shepherding love and tender care. But I think for me personally, a lot of it looks like just praying and asking the Lord. And I'll either feel a prompting or kind of just be super consistent in the place of prayer of asking. Maybe not even always asking the Lord where he's at, but sometimes just acknowledging that he's the good shepherd and I trust him. And I think there's still moments, because technically I'm diagnosed with persistent depressive disorder. It doesn't affect me as much as it was in that season. But I think even in those moments, there's every once in a while I dip into a low and I'll just be kind of in a low state for about a week. And I have to constantly remind myself, sometimes out loud, that he's good and he's there. And this isn't the narrative that he's writing for me, and that there is more. And then I'll try my best to lean into the scriptures I don't know if there's a set scripture I go to, but I mean, I love the New Testament. I love the Gospels. I've probably read through Matthew like 50 times just because it's so good. And I love to hear Jesus' teachings and the way he interacts and loves on people. But I think prayer has been the biggest thing for me. Communicating with God, asking him questions, and sometimes even just sitting in the silence, waiting for his voice or just waiting for peace. And it's just letting that carry me through those harder moments. I don't know if that answers your question, but...
Yes, I don't even know what question I did. But it's good. It's powerful. You wanted to say something, Mili?
I just want to ask you, did you hear God? So he talks to you. Can you hear him? Or how you have that connection with him? Because
yeah,
I just want to know.
This is fascinating. I get asked this question a lot. I don't exactly know how to describe it. There's a lot of times I feel promptings, but if I'm being completely honest, most of the way I hear God is it's almost like a quick movie scene in my head.
Wow.
And it's like...
That's cool.
Like sometimes I get the wildest pictures and I just fully understand what the Lord's saying.
So you have visions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
And because it's like...
Yeah.
I'll just give this quick example.
Yeah.
I started mentoring a student last year at Pacifica, and I felt like I had to break through some wall. And I try to be very careful in this, especially with people who don't necessarily have this theology built. But I got a picture of him playing with an old wooden train, like the ones that have the magnets on the back that you connect. And I felt like the Lord was saying that he's filled with curiosity, and he has this level of curiosity. And then I sit him down and I said, hey, I felt like the Lord is speaking these 3 things. This is the first thing. And I started explaining it to him, and his jaw drops. And he says, that's the first memory I have as a kid.
Wow.
And like, I had no idea. But in my head, I just saw a quick little like vision movie reel of him playing with a wooden train. So that is the most consistent, clear way that God speaks to me.
So good.
And I feel like it's just a muscle that, because hearing God's voice is something I feel like you really have to learn to really have your ear tuned to heaven and what God's saying. And I feel like the more I've done it, the more I've engaged with God in those moments, the more I've learned, like, this is when he's speaking and this is just me.
It's so excited.
It's so special.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I have in Joel 2:22, it says, this is the Old Testament, right? And I'm reading it in Spanish, so forgive me if my translation is not super accurate, but it says something like, and later on, I will pour out my spirit over every flesh, and they will prophesy. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy, and your old men will have dreams, and your young men will have visions, right? So this is Joel. And then in the book of Acts, so fast forward right to the New Testament, it says that Peter comes, and where are some... okay, it's not here. But it's basically where it says that the Spirit falls on them, and then they start speaking different tongues, right? Yeah. So I think, in a sense, what it's trying to say is that it's almost like a fulfillment of the prophecy, even though I feel like it's still being fulfilled, right? Like this is kind of like a side topic, but I love the idea of quantum physics and that God works outside of the realm of time. So he's working. So the same way he was working maybe with David in the Old Testament in his life, in that moment, he's still working today through his spirit, right? I don't know, it's hard to explain, but basically without the constraints of time. Right? So the same way God was pouring out his spirit for some people in the Old Testament as people were prophesying is the same way God's spirit fell down in the book of Acts over his followers, right? The people that were following Jesus, and then start speaking in different tongues and in a sense like prophesying to the people that were around them, all the miracles of God. And it's that same spirit that's still here available today, and giving you like dreams and visions, but it's always for the sake of his goodness and his kingdom, right? Like here, speak this life into this person, right? And I'll give you an image. And I love that because it's so beautiful about God that like he could have given that vision of the train to that kid, but he gave it to you so that you could share with him, and maybe even that his jaw would drop and be like, wow, that is God, because that God is so much like that. Like he sometimes he wants to speak to you through somebody else, but then sometimes he's waiting for that somebody else to come to him and to want him so much and desire his heart for somebody else. Like he's like, okay, now I can, in a sense, like prophesy through you for the sake of somebody else to build my kingdom, right? So I don't know, it's just that's just so beautiful about how God works.
Yeah.
Right?
It is really special too, because that kid repeatedly brings that moment up.
Wow.
Because it was such a marking moment. And his response is, I don't think he can fully wrap his head around it still. His response is always, that was just so crazy. That God gave you that vision.
Yes.
And I can't explain it either, because it really is just God. It was nothing that I could have done or came up with. Yeah. So it's definitely really special.